This is just a quick recap of today's lecture. So yesterday we talked about how to evaluate sources for credibility, and we're going to continue with that discussion, but also talk about how to use sources based on that credibility. So this is what we did in class. So keep in mind that anything can be a source. Anything at all. It doesn't mean that that source is credible and that you can use it for evidence, but anything can be a source. So whenever you have a claim or assertion or point in a formal essay, you have to back it up with a credible source. But we'll see that examples or supporting evidence doesn't have to be necessarily credible, and we'll talk about how to use that. So, for example, let's say you live in a house, and the last house I lived in, I had a fence that faced a corner, and the two local gangs would have a little graffiti war on the fence. So there were examples from two different gangs. So let's say I take photographs of those of that graffiti. Well, those photographs are sources. So if I'm going to use them in a formal essay, I need to cite myself, because I'm the author, and that's the ethical way of letting readers know where those photographs came from. And I could use them in a formal research paper. So think about what kind of paper would use those. So the answer would be, let's say if I'm doing a research paper in sociology about different gang markings, and I'm using those photographs as examples of different gang graffiti. You know, this gang has this style as evidenced by this photograph. So I can use the photographs as examples, but I still need to have a credible source that shows that yes, this gang is associated with this type of graffiti. But the photo will enhance understanding, and it will complement the credible secondary source. The photo would be considered a primary source because I created it. It's coming directly from the source, from the event itself. Alright, so let's talk about how you could use a photo of your dog. Well, let's say you are writing a research paper about different dog breeds, and you have a purebred corgi. Well, you could photograph your corgi as an example of, you know, this is what a purebred corgi looks like, you know, if you were discussing types of small dogs. The second example is a personal blog post about the lack of Native American video game protagonists. So a protagonist in this case is probably going to be the character that you would play as. It's the main character. And when I say personal, it's someone else, but it's not associated with a school or a company. It's one individual's blog post. So let's say you were writing an essay on the lack of racial diversity in video games. You could use that person's ideas, you know, for example, let's say in their blog post they said, you know, the only time we see Native Americans in video games is if they're highly stereotyped, you know, the warrior with the headdress and war paint. You could, you know, maybe you wanted to quote from that, so you would need to cite them. But you could still use it even though it's not a credible source. You know, they're not an expert in that field. You know, you don't know who they are, but you still like their idea, and it still works for your paper. A YouTube video of a professional ballet recital. Maybe you're comparing how performances have changed over the years. So you watch a video that was released this year, and then you watch a few videos from 20 years ago, and then compare and contrast. And the last one, a radio commercial for tires made by an announcer born in Texas. So this one's a little tricky. You know, how would you use that? You don't know who the guy is. Well, let's say you were writing a linguistics essay on regional dialects and accents, and you wanted to use his accent as an example. So you would still need credible sources showing, yes, this is what makes it a Texas accent, these features, but you're able to cite this as an example, and it would work well in that essay. So again, you can use a source as an example of something that you've backed up with other more reliable and credible evidence. And then you can use a bias source to talk about bias or expose bias. For example, one person, said, well, if you were talking about Hitler, you might want to use his writing, Mein Kampf. And so even though the writing is biased, we can't prove anything using that writing, we can still talk about it to talk about Hitler himself. So that's why primary sources are so valuable. And then the last one is using a source to support a claim or present a fact. And this is what you'll be doing the most of. This is just your basic, your research essay is on types of otters, and so you read encyclopedia entries and a marine biology textbook that has a section on otters. That would be secondary sources that are credible. And that's what we're doing the most of in this class. But I just want you to realize there are no bad sources, only bad uses of those sources. So if you use it correctly, you can pretty much use anything. So here's an example. I had a student who was writing about Russia, and it was just a simple country report. And when I read it, it sounded really strange, because he was saying that, life over there is depressing, everything is gray, it rains every single day, there's nothing to do, no fun, no fun things, people go to work and go home, they don't go out, and women are very lonely, and it's very difficult to find a good boyfriend, and they're not able to eat the delicious things that they would like. And so they live a very harsh, depressing life. And I thought, this sounds really biased. And so I looked at his source, and it was a website for a Russian mail-order bride website. So obviously that source would not work if you're reporting on a country. If you're trying to present facts about a country, well, a mail-order bride website would not work. But if you were writing about the sociological practice of using mail-order bride services, it might be a good idea to go on some mail-order bride websites and find out about their practices firsthand, because, sometimes they have prices right on the website, or they have how you go about contacting them, or the biographies of the women available, which, would all make very interesting things to talk about in an essay or research paper on mail-order brides. So you could see how the same source can be used for one academic essay, but not for another. So it really depends on, how you use it. So for the assignment, you're going to choose a section in your textbook, and not your Rules for Writers book, but the textbook, either on history or sociology or whatever you chose. And if you're making this up later and you need a textbook, you can either use one that you already have, or you can come borrow one from me. Alright, so what you're going to do is you're going to choose a passage, and then you're going to find the same information as a primary source on the internet, and you're going to send me that link. And you'll be using the handout that's also on Canvas. Sorry, I got distracted by something outside. So on your handout, you'll read about primary versus secondary sources, and that'll help you find those primary sources, because it gives you ideas of, what primary sources can look like. So, for example, let's say your textbook talks about the Irish famine. Your primary source might be a poem written about a family member who lost people in the famine. Okay? The second part of the assignment is to choose a different section in the textbook and then find a biased or bad, in another way, source on the same topic using the internet. And you're also going to send me the link to that. So when I say bad, it's in quotation marks because remember, there are no bad sources. But on the other side of your handout, it'll talk about evaluating sources for usefulness. So it could just be it's outdated. You know, if you're writing a paper for a science class on human cloning and you're using a source that was written 40 years ago, well, that's not a very good source because the science has changed significantly since then. So it's no longer valid. So that's one reason why that source may not work. And so by reading that handout, you'll see what other reasons are there for a source to be not that great to use. So then your final assignment will be a Canvas message to me, and it'll include your name, and then it'll give me a link to the primary source, and you'll explain what makes it a primary source and what type of source it is. You'll also give me the link to the biased or otherwise unreliable or unusable or non-credible source, and then explain what makes it unusable as supporting evidence. You know, so what's wrong with this source? And then you'll send that to me in a Canvas message.